Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia CZV tutorial series. We're going to have a look at the modulation screen today, this curiously grayed out section that we only get to see when both lines are engaged. Lots of hidden delights to have a look at in here. If you're enjoying this series so far and you'd like to help support my channel, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to do that. Okay, let's get on with this modulation screen. Now, the reason why most of these options, the top two rows, are grayed out when we've only got one sound generator in use is because they rely on the interaction between two sound generators. The first row is the easiest one to deal with. Now, this is detune, but it's detune on line 2. So what I mean by that is that at the moment, if I turn line 2 down but leave it active and press a C, there's the 65 Hertz of the C. I'll just turn it up an octave. 130 Hertz, great stuff. Now line 2, there's our 130 Hertz. I'm going to increase the pitch of that by a semitone. And go back to line 1. This will still be at 130 Hertz. So when I play both of those lines together, they're detuned relative to each other. We've only detuned line 2. And now you can see this, the tuner doesn't really know what to do with it. It starts reading false positives when you've got two very closely aligned pitches like that. Now you can have some harmonic fun with detune. If we choose 7, then we've set a perfect fifth between these two notes, which is a very common, this their power chord interval. 5 is a very easy one as well. Perfect fourths, major thirds, minor thirds. So it's really easy to be like harmonically interesting, specifying a fixed offset between these two notes. There are lots of reasons why you can't just go up. You can't play like a C major scale all the way up and have everything sit within a similar scale, but that's beyond the scope of today's conversation. Yeah, I'm not going to jump down that rabbit hole today. Fine tune can be really interesting as well. If you generate a very small amount of fine tune, you can get some really interesting tones between these two sound generators. I'm just going to introduce some of the sawtooth via the DCW, so we've got a slightly more interesting sound to play with. Now I'll just press a C all on its own. Not particularly exciting. Let's get it in view in the oscilloscope. Now I'm going to introduce a very small amount of fine tune. So these two oscillators are going to be very slightly offset against each other, and you get a much more interesting sound. There you go. Hear those two tones? They're almost chorusing against each other. Chorus and flange live in exactly this territory. When you start with very small offsets, we'd have to modulate. If I did this kind of thing, that's exactly a chorus. That's what a chorus unit does. It modulates the difference in pitch rather than leaves it static, but nevertheless, all very interesting stuff. So lots of cool things to play with detune. It's not just a case of making really unpleasant kind of atonal stuff. The next row down is a little bit more meaty, and in order to demonstrate ring modulation, which is what this function is, I'm just going to turn my DCWs back down again because I want to be dealing with sine waves initially to demonstrate this sound. So here we are with both of our lines generating sine waves. You see when they're combined together, they make a composite wave that's twice as loud. Now it's not really a sine wave. If it was, you'd only have the fundamental, but all of this interesting stuff down below is telling us that it's not a pure sine wave. One of the reasons why I think this synth sounds so good is because nothing is pure. It has a kind of sense of analog. Right, I'm getting sidetracked again. Let's stay focused. Ring modulation is all about using line 1, sound generator 1, as a modulator to modulate the amplitude, not the frequency, the amplitude of line 2. So line 2 is going to be the carrier. This is the thing that's being modulated. Line 1 is doing the modulating. Now, amplitude modulations at pitch frequencies don't result in tremolo. Very slow amplitude modulation is tremolo, the periodic increasing and decreasing of volume. But at pitched levels, like we're dealing with here up in the hundreds of hertz, You're not going to get that. You're going to get something called a sum and difference effect. I'm going to be able to demonstrate it in Insight. So I'm going to turn the ring modulator on, and we're at 100% here. And for the purpose of this experiment, I just need to establish one thing very quickly. If I turn the level of both sound generators down, we still get sound. It's very, very quiet, but just bear in mind that there's this constant tone being generated in the background, so zero level isn't really zero level. Now line 1 is just outputting a C, as simple as you like. So I'm not really interested in that sound generator. The good stuff is happening in line 2. Let's turn that up. And we get a really interesting thing happening on the spectrum analyzer. Just turn the master output down so I can talk over the top of this. Have a look at these frequency peaks. Here's our original 130 Hertz. This is the C that's being generated kind of silently by these sound generators. It's not really a part of the main story. If the synth was operating air quotes properly with line 1 at 0 level, you shouldn't be seeing this at all, but let's move on. This is the interesting thing. This peak here is the frequency of these two waves added together. That's the sum. Well, that's the sum part of sum and difference. It's impossible to demonstrate at this moment. There is a 0 as well, but obviously 0 frequency, 0 Hertz is not really very interesting to look at. But this pitch here is the sum of these two waves, which is why the tuner is now outputting 261 Hertz rather than 130. Turn the ring modulator off. Pitch drops back down to its natural. Line 2 is currently generating a C. When we add these two pitches together, they become 260. So that's the principle of ring modulation. It adds the frequencies of both waves together and also subtracts them and only outputs the sum and the difference. Ordinarily, your fundamental, the frequency that you started with, is completely absent in ring modulation, but because this synthesizer has this little bit of tone going in the background, you are actually seeing the fundamental as well. Kind of a false reading. Now, it's all very well and good me demonstrating these principles using sine waves, and that lets me show you the concept of sum and difference, but that's not what ring modulation is all about. Ring modulation is all about having interesting tones. So we'll bring the DCWs back in, get something non-sine wave like. We'll have a quick listen to that. Already much more interesting harmonic shapes, but then ring modulation is all about pushing that envelope a little bit further. If we offset the two oscillators, don't forget you can't hear, theoretically, you can't hear line 1 at all. All you're hearing is line 2. But now you're going to get really odd frequency offsets because these two different pitches that are being generated by line 1 and line 2 are now different amounts of frequencies apart, and they're being arbitrarily added together to make really enharmonic stuff. Ring modulation sounds so robotic, metallic, bell-like. There's all sorts of different kinds of terms used to describe it because it throws the fundamentals away. It's only dealing in these mathematically or harmonically unrelated overtones that generates all of this kind of wild stuff. You also get really interesting results with ring modulation with very small adjustments of the pitch variance. Listen to this. Sounds like the synth accelerating. Very small adjustments of those pitch variances. A fine control is 1/100th of a semitone. So we're making tiny changes to the difference between the pitches of these two sound generators. Now, all of that time I had level 1 turned down because it's very boring. It's just outputting a C. So on top of all the craziness that's coming out of line 2, we've just got this really stable, static, boring C in the background. So I've taken that away just to highlight really what the ring modulator's bringing to the party. Okay, let's throw that away and we'll introduce the noise modulator instead. There are two different options for noises. We're just dealing with noise modulation here. I'll show you the difference today. Also note that we've got a couple of buttons. So down in the main interface, the buttons that I'm clicking for these options are the same in the top row. Okay, noise modulation, what does this do? It's my nice simple C tone. Now when I start introducing noise modulation here, what it's effectively going to do is introduce an entire noise floor, so you're going to see noise across the entire spectrum, but it's bandpassed. There's a frequency around which the noise will kind of track with the tone. It's loosely based on the note that you play. It's easy for me to demonstrate than explain this. Let's get going. Okay, here's our simple note. Now you can see noise being introduced across the entire spectrum. But you can also hear, as I increase the amount of the noise modulation, the overall impression of the tone that we get is going up. Now I've determined loosely there's about a 2-octave span on this amount range. So when we start off at 0, you can't hear any pitch variance at all, back down at C. The moment I start introducing noise, the pitch goes up. So this is the combination of these two pitch-based sound generators combining together. And you can kind of track where the peak is. It's generally speaking around 3 times the fundamental, which means between 1 and 2 octaves worth of pitch variance. Once again, all of this interesting stuff is only happening on line 2. And can you hear that very low noise floor in the background? That's because 0 doesn't really equal 0 in this synthesizer. So we shouldn't be hearing any noise because line 2 is disabled, but it's not quite how it works. It's all good. I like idiosyncrasies. That's where the interesting stuff lives. Okay, so that's noise modulation, which is pitch-centric. The noise source underneath, the final row, isn't. This is literally an independent noise generator, completely decoupled from the noise modulator. And this is just noise. You can see it's being mixed in with the lines, so we need sound generators working in order for us to hear it. And then the colour determines the filtering that's being applied to the noise. So at 100%, we have a high pass filter, or blue noise. You can see this increasing ramp is blue noise. As we pull down closer to 50%, that's a reasonable representation of white noise. The manual also says that 50% is pink noise, and I think 0% is pink noise. This is what pink noise looks like, with a low pass filter being applied to the noise. So do you want dull noise, evenly spaced noise, or tinny treble bass noise? Throw all that stuff away. One final thing I want to talk about today is Unison. Now, it's nothing to do with this central panel, but because it involves both sound generators playing against each other, I thought this was a good place to talk about it. The Unison options are permanently enabled and they're down at the bottom of the synth. Everything that we've done so far has been in Unison 1 mode. You can also see that we've got 8-note polyphony here, so if I played 9 notes on the keyboard, one of them would be lost. I'm going to crank the polyphony all the way up to 32. It's going to be a higher CPU burden, but it's fine, we can handle it. But what I can now do is more easily demonstrate the concept of Unison. So what Unison says is how many sound generators are going to be used to output each note I play on the keyboard. So if I set Unison to 2, watch the polyphony. Okay, so this synthesizer has a maximum of 32 voices available to it. Now, every single key that I press is going to use 2 of them, which means we have a maximum of 16-note polyphony. Now, at the moment, that's just a louder version of what we would have had beforehand, because both of those voices are doing exactly the same thing. Also note I've kept it incredibly simple here. I've just got a single line working. I will introduce a little bit of DCW just to give me a slightly more interesting tone, but only slightly. Now I'm going to detune those 2 voices against each other. I'm not using the central panel. This is a different concept. This detune is accomplished at the top of the instrument, Unison detune, and I'm going to introduce a very small amount. And now you can hear that semi-chorus effect where these two, it's actually called unison detune, it's not called chorus. If I was to modulate the amount of the detune, then it would be a chorus. This is chorus. You can see me increasing and decreasing detune, but when it's static, it's just called unison detune. And it's a lovely effect. As I introduce more tone, there are more harmonics to play with, all of these lovely kind of washing frequency ranges. So if you think about it, these two voices are very slightly out of tune with each other, which means that the time it takes for one oscillator to generate a thing is slightly different from the time it takes the second oscillator to generate a single wave. And it's that constant play between them that generates this lovely sound. Unison is just quite magnificent, and you can crank it really high. So at 4-voice unison, we've only got 8 notes to play with, but that's absolutely fine. I very rarely play 8 notes anyway. And suddenly, it starts sounding absolutely gorgeous. Each of those voices does actually have 2 sound generators. So if we really go for it, that'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit like. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.